May we begin with a word of prayer together. Holy One, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be pleasing and strengthening to you, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Now, some of you know, a few weeks ago, I had a chance to travel to Memphis to go and attend our General Assembly of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And when I travel, if there is a site that's within a 9-hour drive, I'm driving instead of flying. And I live kind of a crazy, busy life, and a lot of us do. But when I do those long drives, it gives me a chance to listen to music, maybe reach out and do a few Bluetooth phone calls to friends. And I'd kind of mapped out my music list and the people I was going to call and had a plan for this drive to Memphis a few weeks ago. The week prior to me leaving, our church was helping host a Be the Neighbor group from Dallas. And the senior pastor of that church, Verzola Law, was the senior pastor and was with the group that week and said, "Are you going to the assembly?" She said, "Yes." I said, "How are you getting there?" She goes, "Well, it's kind of going to be a long day on Friday. I'm supposed to get to the airport, the MCI airport early. I've got to fly all the way out to Atlanta. I've got several hours of layover in Atlanta, then back to Memphis. It's going to be a long day." I said, "Well, you can do that, or you can let me be your Uber driver, and I can just drive you to Memphis." She goes, "That sounds like a great plan." So my dream of music and Bluetooth calls went out the door. And Verzola Law, and we've been friends for 35 plus years, and it's been a great relationship through the years. And we get to share from time to time, but rarely do you get to spend 7 hours with someone. You kind of got dedicated time in the car. And so we had this grand time. And our conversations, as you might imagine, she is equally as extroverted as me. And so you can imagine the energy that was in that car. We talked about all things dad jokes, and she's well aware of my dad jokes. We talked about the problems in the church. We talked about the joys within the church. We talked about racial justice stuff. We talked about preaching life. We talked about all this stuff. And it was just this great journey. About halfway through the experience, we were hungry, and we stopped at a Dairy Queen. And we go into the Dairy Queen. It was kind of the place that there weren't many options, and she had particular food she didn't want, and Dairy Queen at least had a few options that we could include some options for her. We go in, we look at the menu, and the Dairy Queen menu, I used to be pretty comfortable with the menu, but on the menu, there is a hamburger that stands out amongst all the other burgers. All there was like double cheeseburger, single burger, and there's one that just said backyard burger. And my weird, twisted brain thinking, why is there one burger that's differently named than all the other burgers? So I say out loud to Verzola, well, why isn't there a front yard burger? And the patio pool burger and all this? I'm saying all these different named burgers that should be on the menu. If they're going to put a backyard burger, they need all these other burgers on there. What I didn't know is these two women standing in front of us about to order start laughing at my commentary about the menu. And about the time they start looking back and laughing, Verzola quickly jumps in front of me and goes, "No, no, no. You do not want to encourage this behavior. I have 3.5 more hours with this person in the car," which prompted even more laughter from the two women in front of us. They eventually order their food and they go sit down. I'm next up, I order my food. And while Verzola's ordering her food, I make a special trip to the table where the two women were and just said, "I want to share how appreciative I am of you encouraging my humor. It makes me feel as though there's some worth in my life." And it's very sappy conversation at the table. And they impromptu say to me, "We just think you're hilarious. And if you have time, if you'll come back to the office for the rest of the day, you can keep us laughing the rest of the day." They wanted me to go back to the church, to their office with them for the rest of the day. Verzola was beside herself at this point. Before we leave, I make a restroom stop. I come back out. In the parking lot, she has started a conversation with two women again, takes a selfie with the two women in the parking lot, then prompts to put this entire post on Facebook about the Dairy Queen experience. Between my friend list on Facebook and Verzola's friendship list on Facebook, by the time we got to the assembly in Memphis and we're checking in, at least within the first 30 minutes, 15 people said, "I want to hear about the Dairy Queen adventure." We all need people in our lives that bring all sorts of things to us. And we all need circles of people around us that give us a sense of vitality, allow us to thrive, allow us to be the best of who we are as individuals. I have said before that I have what I call the Fab Five. And that's 5 people in my life that I can call on at any moment. And they are people of different ages, different generations, different backgrounds, but they have become central to my life. And people say, Chris, how do you stay energized? And how do you do this? And how do you do that? Well, these 5 people keep me in check. And they ask hard questions, and they have all kinds of support mechanisms. And I ran across an article recently that subscribed to the 5-person circle that you need in your life. But those 5 people, they gave particular titles to those 5 people in your life. The first one they call is an agitator. You need an agitator in your life. Some that will ask you challenging questions and push you when you sometimes just want someone to agree with all your great ideas. Not all your ideas are great. So you need someone to ask questions and push and challenge. And Don Shutt is that for me. He is a retired disciple minister, former chaplain of a hospital, 83, is one of my best friends. And one of the things I love and hate about my conversations with Don is we'll have this conversation, I'll be sharing this great idea. Is that really what you want to do? Do you think the people are really going to respond to that the way you think they are? And he asks all these kind of questions. He's kind of almost like a Jesus figure. He doesn't give you answers, he just gives you questions. But he gives me all kinds of agitational questions, helping me think through again the things that I've got going on in my mind. And so I'm thankful for Don as an agitator in my life. A second piece, a second role that's in that 5-person circle, they said, is an encourager. Someone through notes or calls or hugs or whatever that says, I just love this about you. You're just this. You just need the person that just encourages you and celebrates who you are and gives thanks for who you are. And you need that kind of person in your life. The third kind of person you need in your life is a connector. You're having a conversation with someone and they said, you need to know so-and-so. And we all need that connector in our life that connects us to people that we may not know that could be beneficial to our lives. We'll have some conversation around racial justice or immigration or whatever the topic is. Have you talked to so-and-so yet? That's the perfect person you need to visit with. And you always have a friend that's kind of a connector type person, or you need a connector in your life. There's another person in your life is what they call the pace setter. And a pace setter kind of helps you with your rhythm. You seem awful busy right now. You need to take a little time for yourself. You need to have some quiet space just for you to re-energize. You can't keep yourself going at this level if you want to be good to other people as well as yourself. And the pace setter pays attention to the rhythm of how active or inactive you are. If you're overly inactive, the pace setter says, you need to kind of get out and do something. Let's go to lunch. Let's go do something. Let's get out of your sedentary ways. And the pace setter is the person that helps move you out of your rhythms that might be unhealthy. And the last person in your life is the joy giver. I love this kind of person in my life because they allow me to be my silly self when I want to be silly. They kind of engender laughter and smiles and enthusiasm for life, and need all 5 of those kinds of personalities in your life. It's one of the things I think is crucial. When I think about this theme of the path of wholeness, we talked about vulnerability and openness last week, and today is true company. It's if we're going to be vulnerable, we need people to be vulnerable with. And what people do we need around us is what I would call true company. The people that help you be your best version of yourself. Now, in the Gospels, when Jesus is in the midst of calling disciples, he calls a whole varying array of people to surround him in his ministry. And he starts out with people we think are, I think I'd need to be an agitator for Jesus when he does his disciple calling. And he goes over to these boats and says to the disciples, I want you to drop your nets, come with me, we're going to go fish for people. And they drop their nets and go. And then Jesus goes over here and finds a tax collector and says, hey, Matthew, I have maybe a different course of life for you. Instead of being a tax collector, I want you to come walk with me. I'm not sure all the places we're going, but it's going to be fun. But come with me. And he leaves his job as a tax collector and goes with Jesus. And I'm thinking, if I was the agitator, is this the people you really want to call Jesus to be the people that are going to surround you for the next several years? You want fishermen and tax collectors, and you want all these people that are kind of on the margins. Don't you want the best of the best? And yet these are who he calls. And how interesting this dynamic happens as these 12 disciples are called and say yes to Jesus, these people are kind of thrown together, and they have different gifts and different graces and different ideas and maybe different backgrounds within their own Judaic history. Some have more of a monastic kind of edge to them, and some have more of a revolution-style spirit within them. And some just kind of want to play it safe and do the right thing. And Jesus has all those disciples in his mix. And sometimes the disciples get at odds with each other. Well, I'm probably Jesus' favorite disciple, and I don't know about y'all, but I'm clearly in the top tier of the disciples. Jesus talks to me more than he talks to all of you. And the disciples are as prone to humanness as the rest of us. And yet, out of that mix of the varying gifts and qualities and personalities that are found in that group of disciples, they find a cohesiveness along with Jesus to do something they never thought they could have ever done on their own. And they totally changed the course of their own lives, left things behind they would have thought they would never have left behind, and the richness that came to their life was more beneficial than they could have ever imagined. The other cool thing I love about this movement that Jesus creates with the disciples is over time, we typically think of Jesus and the 12 disciples going everywhere, but scholars tell us that over time, it wasn't just the 12 disciples with Jesus. That following that followed Jesus around became bigger and was more inclusive than we might think of just 12 men. There were women that followed with Jesus. There were probably family members connected that followed with Jesus. There was others. And the book of Acts, which I highlight today, is the same author is the writer of the Gospel of Luke. And one of the things we know of the Lucan author of Luke and Acts is that Luke goes out of his way, and Jesus goes out of his way to include more people that have been included. There's more marginalized people included in the Gospel of Luke. There's more women included than the other Gospels. Luke has a way of including more people into the mix of what it means to be a follower and be a part of this movement. So we get to chapter 1 of the book of Acts, and we're kind of in this in-between spot. The resurrection has taken place, but the Spirit has not yet come to the disciples. They've not received that gift of the Spirit. So they're kind of in this in-between space. And when you're in in-between spaces, it's kind of this space of ambiguity or this liminal space. You're not quite sure what to do with this in-between space. And the disciples and the followers and all those that had gathered, they could have easily said, well, when we get some idea what we're going to do, we'll call ourselves back together. And that's not what they do. They have had over 3 years to develop these nice networking of relationships in which they feel familial in nature. And they challenge one another, support one another, encourage one another, agitate one another. They connect one another. They do all those things. And we find in chapter 1, when most people would pass by verses 12 through 14 because there was a really important passage here, and what's coming is even more important. Why would we read these two little verses in between? But in this 2 little verses, wedged in verses 12 through 14, it shares that the remaining 11 disciples, women, and family gather together in an upper room in Jerusalem, and they dedicate themselves to prayer and fellowship with one another. Until we figure out the next step, we're going to be together, and we'll rely on God's presence to guide us in whatever happens next in our life. Now, when I think of liminal spaces, in-between spaces, I feel like our society is in this in-between space. We're kind of curious what's going to happen next. We're waiting for the next shoe to drop, or the next legislative action, or the next executive order, or the next person to show up and deport this person, include this person, and marginalize this person, and disconnect that person from this person, and make this person feel that they're not welcome to be here anymore. There's this separation of people, this dividing of people. When we think about the ministry of Jesus, it was an antithesis to what we're seeing today. Instead of dividing people out and separating people out, Jesus was out bringing people together, crossing boundaries and lines and busting through walls and creating bridges and places of connection so that we find a more thriving way to be community with one another. And I think through, how do I want to get through this space and time? If I want to be whole as a person, I want to be my authentic self, but I don't want to do it alone. I need true company around me. In the face of uncertainty, we can either separate out, be filled with anxiety and wonder, and not that that will ever go away, or we can be together. We can agitate one another. We can encourage one another. We can connect one another. We can give joy to one another. We can do all those things with one another in ways we wouldn't do on our own. So places like this at St. Andrew Christian Church, though it's not perfect, it's a place we try to enact vulnerability and live out the values and the morals that Jesus tried to embody by calling those first disciples and not saying, well, that's it, 12's the number, no more people allowed in. That circle just got bigger and bigger and bigger. They met in an upper room. They weren't sure what was going to happen. But one thing they did know is they had all the right people they needed in the room to do the very next most faithful thing. And I think we're in the same space together here in this community. May it be so. Amen.